Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the results of our OK Cupid project, which we're calling Project Love. So my name is Grant, and on behalf of my colleagues Nora, Juan, and Vidura, I'd like you to share on this journey with us as we go through the insightful data that we've found. If we think about the project itself and the key deliverables, so fundamentally, we're looking at the data sets that we have from the OK Cupid site and looking at it and trying to drive some micro segments and also some personas that can be used in the future. And so to do this, we've relied on the OK Cupid data set, but then we've also looked at 3 supplemental data sets to see where we can combine the data and then enrich it and make it as most useful as possible. So I'd like to hand over to Nora, who will walk you through our next slide around some of the data cleansing activities.
Thanks, Grant. Well, so we started with our step number 2 of actually looking at the data, starting to cleanse it, get to know it, and enrich it. We made an in-depth exploratory analysis of the supplemental data that was given, including the census. We identified vectors, parameters such as ethnicity, household information, education, demographics that we thought could be relevant. And we looked at those individual data sets to get to know the data and understand what we were dealing with. So we also understood that there would also be outliers. We looked at the different outliers, such as, the age. We noticed that one of the profilers was, 110 and dating. So we didn't think that that actually applied to our marketing purposes for today. So we took that into account when we looked at relevant data. We introduced maximum and minimum values to reduce those outliers. And we did things like that to the income and other social attributes that might not have been relevant for us, such as, we did the minimum maximum for alcohol and drugs. So we did that and we further looked at the data to understand key locations and remove specifically non-US locations that might produce additional outliers in the information. There was a man in Scotland who would show up in everything. So he was an outlier in when we tried to look at, drugs and alcohol within the US. We didn't necessarily think he matched into some of the marketing data we wanted to look at. We would then extract, some non-usable data into formats that were more analytically friendly. We also reduced the dimensions of the census data to ensure that we could compare apples to apples. We could compare those outcomes so that they're usable. We did see that there was a commonality across all of our data sources. When we looked at the census data and the geographical data and the OK Cupid data, there was a lot of commonality among those data sets. So that helped us verify what we were looking at, such as the location and the address, and it made us feel really good about the data that we did have, that it was accurate. We found a lot of really interesting information that we thought were fun for curiosity's sakes, but might not have been insightful for us. We looked at the location of the ethnicities to see if that could be really interesting. We also compared that location ethnicity to, drug and alcohol use to see if that was something. And while it was interesting, we found it wasn't very valuable to perhaps our marketing, just because it didn't show anything outside of, the norm of what you would expect. Just from common knowledge. So, but key correlations, we found some useful vectors: education versus religion, age, gender, the location, ethnicity, pets, male versus female, income, salary, what types of words that they like to use. That's something we all looked at to try and get to know the data and to see what we were working with, and then try to understand our population. So I am going to hand now over to Juan to tell us about that.
So some of the insights we found during our analyzing of data, we tried to get to understand who our users were, and some of the preliminary findings were our average user is of 30 years median age. Their salary tends to be around 104K. The gender distribution skewers to be predominantly male. We have a 40.2% female user base. Our age groupings are between 20 and 24, 25 to 29, 30 to 34 are our primary user base. 56% of our users have graduated in some form or another, whether it be from university, a master's degree, or a PhD. We profiled the users' personal essays for a variety of data scraping. We found that male users tend to be the most profane ones, and 45, and an interesting fact is that 45% of our users mention travel in their profiles. Then we continue to use this data along with enriching the data with information from the census and geolocation in order to be able to extrapolate more information. We track down the participants by their location in the world, track their gender by location, group them by age, sex, and location, by salary and quantile clustering. We check their ethnicity along with their age and education, measured if they had drug or alcohol usage, and then measured it against their age, ethnicity, and location, as well as their education, and along with the census data determined that many of these venues just tracked with regular census information. So then we had to take a different line of action, which I'll let Vidur tell you about.
So we used 3 analytical techniques to produce the 4 personas. The first technique that we used was an exploratory data analysis to see what trends appear from within our data set. The second one was text mining. So what we did was we picked up the raw data that was provided by the users in the form of essays and produce all the insights that we could from all the different trends that was appearing from all the words that we saw. On the right side, we can see the word cloud based off the actual data, which was extracted from these essays. The third technique that we used was we aggregated the data to generate insights that were not evidential by just looking at the raw data at the basic grouping level of gender, age, or social indicators. We performed 4 tests that produce insightful personas. The first one was we took the basic profile of the West Coast subscribers. We figured out what region and ethnicity was there and split it by the age bracket. We clustered the profession and the income to see what insights we get from there. And lastly, we saw what was the pet preference by age and by gender. So for our first persona, we looked at what does the most normal OK Cupid profile looks like. So most of the OK Cupid profile was based off 60% male, who were predominantly white, living in the West Coast, and used recreational drugs, and spoke one language. We did all these analyses. We plotted everything on a map and identified what was the location, and saw that most of our users were coming from California region. And we also figured out how many languages everybody speaks and split it by the ethnicity. And you can see on the right side all the ethnicities, the number of languages they speak, and it was the equal split between male and female. So my colleague can take over persona 2.
So here we wanted to look at the cultural background, the education of most of our profilers, our profile users, so that we could get a better sense of that. So we capped some of the age data to remove some of the outliers, including the, our 110, the dater who was 110. But with that data, we were able to get, a good mean of the age or a good range of the age, as well as the average. But then we ran it against, the ethnicity, of and our age grouping. And we saw an even distribution of religions across the 20 to 40-year-old age grouping. And we thought that was really interesting and could be useful. Of the profiles that responded to the education question, 56% are graduates and have more than one degree. And if you can see to the right, our graph, graduated from college and university, you can kind of see the range of the percentages you're looking at of religions and their education. Graduating from a master's degree, we thought Hinduism and Judaism was an interesting statistic. But this gives you an idea of the people that responded to education and religion, what that subset is, and the diverse representation of religions that are on here. So, and then we'll move on to our persona number 3.
Thank you, Nora. We then took a look at the professional representation. We found that for a large subset of our database, the profession they preferred either to not answer, or they wouldn't fit into any of the presets that were available to them. We found that there was a direct correlation between males and females in male-dominated industries such as engineering and computer science. We also observed that female population tended to be higher in medical industries as well as education industries. And next up, we'll let viewers.
Okay, thanks, Juan. I think, I mean, what we've seen in a lot of the data so far is that, especially when we look at the physical attributes when people answer or people don't answer, that it's a highly educated population and a group of people who are, I would say, less superficial than some of the other sites that we've seen. So it's a quality data set that we've got. The fourth persona that we're really looking at was, are you a dog or a cat person? And it was very interesting when we look at the data to see how they responded. And we saw a direct correlation between males and females in the 20 to 30-year-old age bracket who are, dog owners and cat owners and are strong proponents of that. Um, Even though we saw 1 in 4 users as animal lovers, it was still a very strong population that we felt that it was necessary to communicate and talk about. And it's also interesting with these age groups that their preferences change from dogs to cats as they age. So looking at any of those groups, it was very definitely dog lovers for the younger people and then cat lovers for the older people. Statistically, though, both genders did behave the same, and that was a point to note, is that any marketing activity to both groups is from an animal lover's perspective is applicable to both of them. So from that perspective, drawing a conclusion between your typical West Coast user, whether it's a 60% male, whether it's who speak 60% male who speak one language, or whether it is graduates from different religious backgrounds,